In this video, I will show you how to create this desktop application using C#, .NET and Windows Forms. Also, I will show you how to connect to SQL Server database and how to create, read, update and delete clients using SQLClient. So here we have all the clients, and to create a new client, we can click on this button. Then we can fill this form. Let's click on Save. So here we can see that we have this new client. Now to update the client, we need just to select it, then we can click on Edit Client. So here we have the client details. Let's update the email address, for example. Then Save. So here we can see that the email address has been updated successfully. And to delete a client, we can select the client. Let's select this one, for example, then delete. So here we have this confirmation message. If we click on Yes, the client will be deleted. Now let's create a new project. So here let's select C# and Desktop, and let's select Windows Forms App. Then Next. So here let's provide the name of the project. Then Next. So here I will choose the version 7 of the .NET framework, then Create. So now the project is created successfully, and we need to connect to the database. So let's create a new connection. So here we can click on this button. So we need to select Microsoft SQL Server, SQLClient. If you don't have this option, then we can click on Change. And here we need to select Microsoft SQL Server, then OK. So the server is available on my computer. So here we can write dot or localhost. Then let's provide the name of the database. I will call it WinFormDB. Also, we need to enable Trust Server Certificate. So let's click on Advanced. And here in Trust Server Certificate, let's set this variable to true. Then OK. Then OK. So this database does not exist and I want to create it. So let's click on Yes. Now we have this connection. Let's expand it and we have the tables folder. So for the moment we don't have any table, and to create a new table we can use an SQL query. So we can make a right click here, then New Query. And here let's write the SQL queries that allow us to create a new table and to fill it with some data. So the first query will create the client's table. So we will create the ID, the first name, last name, the email address, the phone number, the address, and the date. And by default, the date will be the current date. Then we will insert into the client's table, we will insert the first name, last name, email, phone, and address. And these are the data that we will add into this table. So now to execute these two queries, we can use this button. And here we can see that 16 rows have been added. So we can close this window. And to see the table data, we can go back to the connection and let's refresh the connection first. So here we can see that we have this new table, and to see the data, we can click on Show Table Data. And we have these data. Now let's create a class that will be used to store the client's data. This is called a model. So in our project, let's create a new folder. And let's call it Models. Then let's add a new class. And let's call it Client. So here it is internal. Let's change this and let's replace it with public. Then let's add the different fields of this class. So we need the client ID, first name, last name, the email address, phone number, the address, and the date. Then let's create a new class that allows us to read and write the data from the database. This is called a repository. So let's create a new folder in our project. And let's call it Repositories. Then let's create a new class. And let's call it Client Repository. Let's replace internal with public. Then let's create a private field of type read only where we will save the connection string. So we can create it just here. We can call it connection strings. So now we need the value of the connection string. So we can go back to our connection, we can make a right click, then properties. And here we have the connection string. So let's copy this value. And let's paste it here. Then let's create the first method that allows us to read the clients from the database. So we can call it getClient, and it returns a list of client objects. So client is the model that we already created in this folder. So this is the client model. Let's add the namespace. So in this method, we will create a list of client objects and we will return it. So now we need to fill this list from the database. So here we can add the try-catch block. So in the try block, we will read the different clients from the database, and in the catch block, we have an error. So we can display the error message on the console. So here in the try block, we will create a SQL connection that allows us to connect to the database, and this is the connection string that we already defined just here. Here we can see that we have an error, so we need to add the namespace. So we need either to install the package system.data.SQLClient or Microsoft.data.SQLClient. So Microsoft.data.SQLClient is the latest package, so we can install it. So here we can select Find and Install Latest Version. And now we don't have the error anymore. So here we will open the connection, then we need to read the clients. So first we need to write the SQL query. So here we will select all the columns from the clients table and we will sort the data by descending order of ID. Like this, we will find the newest clients first. Then here we will create an SQL command. Then we have the reader that allows us to read the clients. And here we will read the clients. So for every client that we have in the database, we need to create a model of type client and we need to add it to this list. So here we create a new client, we set the ID, the first name, the last name, the email, phone number, address and date using this object. Then we will add this client to this list. And finally, we will return the list of clients. Now let's create another method that allows us to read a client by ID. So we can create it just here. We can call it getClient. It requires the client ID, so if we find the client, we will return the client. If we don't find the client, then we will return null. That's why here the type is client that can be null. So here by default we will return null. Then we need to connect to the database and to look for a client with this ID. So just here we can add the try-catch block. So in the try block, we will create this SQL connection. We will open the connection. This is the SQL query that allows us to read the client having this ID. And then we will create the command. So here in this using statement, we need to replace this parameter by the client ID, which is equal to this variable. So we can call command.parameters.add with value. This is the name of the parameter that we have here, and this is the value of the variable that we have just here. Then we will create this SQL data reader that allows us to read the client from the database. So now we need to check if we have a client with this ID or not. So if reader.read is true, this means that we have a client with this ID. In this case, we can create an object of type client. We can fill the data of this object and we can return it. Otherwise, by default, we will return null. Now let's create a new method that allows us to create clients. So we can create this method, we can call it createClient, and it requires the client that we will add to the database. Then let's create the try-catch block. So in the try block, we will connect to the database, we will open the connection. This is the SQL query that allows us to insert a new client into the clients table. So we will insert the first name, last name, email, phone, and address. And then we have these parameters. So now we need to replace these parameters with the data of the client. So here we can create an SQL command, then we will replace the different parameters of this query with the data that is available in the client object. Then we will execute the query. Now let's create a new method that allows us to update the client data. We can call it update client, and it requires the client that should be updated. So first let's create the try catch block. In the try block, we will connect to the database, we will open the connection, then here we have the SQL query that allows us to update the client having this ID. So this parameter should be replaced by the ID of the client that is available in this object. Then let's replace the different parameters of this query by the data that is available in this object. So we can create this SQL command, and here we will replace the different parameters of this query by the different values that we have in the client object. Then we will execute the query. Now let's create another method that allows us to delete clients. We can call it delete client, and it requires the client ID. Then let's create the try catch block. In the try block, we will create the connection, we will open the connection, then this is the SQL query that allows us to delete a client having this ID. So this parameter should be replaced by the value of this variable. Then here we create an SQL command, and we replace this parameter by the ID, which is this variable. And then we execute the query. Now let's save all the files, and let's create the form. So first we can change the title of the window. So here we can write Clients Manager, for example. Then let's add a title. So we can add a label. Then let's provide this label with a full width. So here for auto size, we can select false. Then let's increase the width. And to provide the label with the full width of the window, we need to set the anchor property. So we can select this direction. Then let's display the text in the center. So let's change text align. Let's change the text. So here we can write list of clients. And let's increase the font size. Now let's add a button that allows us to create new clients. Let's change the text. So here we can write add client. And let's change the name of the variable. So initially it is equal to button1. So we can call it btn add or btn add client. Then let's add two other buttons. One button to edit the client and another one to delete the client. Let's change the text of this button. So here we can write delete. And let's change the name of the variable. So we can call it btn delete. Let's do the same thing with this button. So let's call it btn edit or btn edit client. And for the text, we can write edit client. Then let's add a table that allows us to display the clients. So we can create a data grid view. And to provide it with the full remaining width and height, we can set the anchor property. So you can select this direction and this one. So now when I change the width of the window, we can see that it will take the full remaining width. But we have a problem with these two buttons, so we can do the same thing. We can select these two buttons and let's set the anchor property. So we can choose this direction and let's remove this direction. So we obtain the expected behavior. Then let's edit some properties of this table. So first let's set row headers visible to false. Like this, we will not obtain a useless column. Then let's set multi-select to false. Like this, we can select only one row at a time. Then let's update selection mode. So let's select full row select. Like this, we will select the full row instead of only one cell at a time. Then let's change auto size columns mode. So let's select full. Like this, the data of the table will be displayed over the full width of the table. Now let's update the source code to display the clients in this table. So we can make a right click, then view code. Then let's create a private method that allows us to read the clients from the database and to fill the table. So we can create the method read clients. Now we need to read the clients. So first we need to create this data table that will be used to fill the table. So here we will create these columns, the client ID, the name, the email address, the phone number, and the date. Then we need to read the clients from the database. So we need our repository, which is this repository. So we can create a repository and we can call the method getClients that allow us to obtain a list of client objects. Then for every client that we have in this list, we will add a row to the table. So for every client in this list, we will create a new row. We will set the client ID. In the second column that displays the name, we will set the first name plus last name. Then we have the email address, then the phone number, then created as the date. Then we will add this row to the data table that we will use to fill the table, which is this variable. Then we will use data table to fill the table. First, let's save the file. Let's go to the designer. So when we select this element, the name is data grid view. So we can change this. And for the name, we can call it clients table, for example. Now let's fill this table. So here we can write this dot clients table dot data source is equal to this data table. Now in the constructor, let's call this method to fill the table. Let's run the application and we obtain this window. So here we can see that we have all the clients. Now I will show you how to create clients. So we need to create a new form. So let's select form and we can call it create edit form. So we will use it to create and to edit clients. Let's change the title. So we can write create client. Then let's add a label. Then let's change the name of the variable. So we can call it LB like label title. Now let's create a form. So let's add a label. Let's change the text. So here we can write client ID. Then let's add another label to display the value of the client ID. And for the moment we can keep it empty. So for the text, let's remove the text. And let's change the name of the variable. So we can call it LBID, for example. Let's add another label. Let's write first name. And let's add a text box. Let's change the name of this text box. So we can call it TB like text box first name. Then let's add other fields. So I created this field for the last name and I called it TB last name. Then I added this field for the TB email address. Then here we have TB phone and this is TB address. Then let's add two buttons, the save button and the cancel button. So let's change the text of the button. And here let's write save. Let's change the name of the variable. And let's call it btn save. Then let's add another button. So let's change the text. So here let's write cancel. And let's change the name of the variable. So we can call it btn cancel. Let's change the size of the window. Then let's add a listener to these two buttons. So we can make a double click on the save button. So this method will be executed when we click on the save button. Let's make a double click on this second button. And here the method that will be executed when we click on the cancel button. So we will use this window as a dialog. So we need to set the default dialog result. So by default, we will return the value cancel. And when we click on the save button, we will return the result OK. So when we click on cancel, we will return the result cancel. So when we click on save, we need to create a new client. So we need to create a model of type client, which is the model that we already created in this folder. And we need to fill it using the data of the form. So we can create this variable of type client. We will set the client ID to 0. Anyway, it will not be used. Then we have the first name, which is the value of the field TB first name. Then we have last name, then the email address, the phone number, and the address. Then we need to save this client in the database. So we can use the repository that we created just here. So this is our repository and this is the method that allows us to create a new client. So client that we have here is this variable. And when we click on cancel, we will just return the result cancel. So we don't need this space, we can delete it. Now let's use this form when we click on the button add client. So let's go to the main form. Let's go to the designer and let's add a listener to the add client button. So in this method, we need to create a form of type create edit form. And if the client has been added successfully, then we need to read the clients again. So we can create this variable of type create edit form. And if the result is OK, this means that the client has been created successfully. In this case, we need to update the list of clients. Let's test the application. Let's click on Add Client and we obtain this form. So this is considered as a dialog. So when we click on this form, we cannot use it because we have this dialog. So if we click on Cancel, nothing happens. Let's click on Add again. And let's fill the form. Then save. So here we can see that this client has been added successfully. Now I will show you how to update clients. So let's go back to create edit form. And let's create a new method that allows us to display the client details. So we can change the default title of the window, so we can write edit client, and we can change the default text of the label, and we can write edit client. In the first label, we will display the client ID, so this is an integer, and this property requires a string, so we can add this empty string. Then we will display the first name, the last name, the email address, the phone, and the address in the form. Also, we will save the client ID into a field like this. When we click on the save button, we will update the client and we will not create a new one. So just here, we can create a private field. We can call it client ID and we can initialize it with the value 0. So 0 means that we will create a new client. Then when we call this method, we will set the value of this field. So we can save the client ID into this field. Now let's update the listener of the save button. So let's set the client ID of this object to the value of this field. Then based on the value of this field, we will decide whether we will create a new client or we will update the client. So if the client ID is 0, then we will create a client. Otherwise, we will update the client. So we can call the repo.updateClient and we can provide it with the client. Then let's add a listener to the edit client button. So here we need to read the ID of the selected row of the table. So here we will read the value of the selected row of the table that is available in the first cell. So we will read the value and we will read it as a string. So if this value is null or if its length is 0, this means that we don't have a valid client ID. In this case, we will exit this method. Otherwise, we need to read this value as an integer. Then we will use our repository to read the client having this ID. So this is our repository and this is the client having this ID. So we can read it using the method getClient. So if we don't find a client having this ID, then we will exit this method. Otherwise, we need to display the form, create edit form, and we need to provide it with this object. So this is the create edit form and we can call the method edit client. We will provide it with this object which contains the client details, and then we will wait for the response of this form. If the response is okay, this means that the data has been updated, and in this case we need to update the table that contains all the clients. Let's test the application. Let's select this client for example, then edit. So let's change the email address, then save. And here we can see that we have the new email address. So let's select it again, then edit client. So here we have the updated value. If we click on cancel, nothing happens. Now I will show you how to delete clients. Let's add a listener to the delete button. First, let's read the ID of the selected row of the table. So here we obtain the client ID of the selected row. Then we can display a confirmation dialog. So if we click on no, we will exit this method. And if we click on yes, in this case, we will delete the client having this ID. So to delete the client, we need our repository. Then we can call the method delete client, and here we have the client ID. Then we need to refresh the table data. Let's run the application. Let's select the client with the ID 14, for example, then delete. So here we have this dialog. Let's click on no, and the client is not deleted. Let's click delete again, then yes. And now we can see that the client with the ID 14 has been deleted.